Okay. Oh. Whoa.
Refer specifically to places where Muslims can practice their beliefs as the ruling sect. And in 1200, that looked like this. So you can see here the caliphates are nearly gone, so focus on the next generation of Islamic states. That means the Turks. They came from Central Asia and quickly built massive empires. Think of the Mamluks in Egypt. There's an illustrative examples video on that one if you're more interested, and of course you are. The Seljuks in the Middle East, the Ottomans on the rise in Anatolia, they'll play a bigger role in the next era. And of course the Delhi Sultanate in India. Now if you followed Ibn Battuta around, you would have traveled to all of these places. And even he said he wasn't as much a world traveler as he was going from Sufi school to Sufi rest house, just going Sufi to Sufi to Sufi. The Sufis follow a mystic form of Islam, and we'll actually see more on them tomorrow. They're essentially Muslims who seek a personal relationship with Allah. So for 1.2, the College Board focuses heavily on innovations and intellectual transfers. Here's a quick overview. 1. Math, algebra, and trigonometry both have their roots in Dar al-Islam. So if math is currently destroying your life, it was probably the math derived from Dar al-Islam, unless it was calculus, and then you can just blame Isaac Newton. Stupid functions. 2. Literature. Aisha al-Baniya is specifically mentioned by the College Board. She's the most prolific Islamic female writer before the 20th century. And her Sufi poetry is pretty great. I mean, I'm not a big poetry guy, but I mean, it seems fine. Not mentioned by the College Board, but also seemingly fine poetry, is a guy named Rumi. He's the best-selling poet in the United States currently, and he's another example of the literary impact of Dar al-Islam. 3. Medicine. Now, the College Board doesn't really say more than medicine, which is helpful, thanks College Board. But the works of polymaths like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina were fundamental to our understanding of medicine, disease, and anatomy. 4. Transfers. College Board likes to look at Dar al-Islam as the caretakers of all the knowledge from the past and the current knowledge of the day. All that ancient Greek and Roman stuff that your teacher talked about forever last year, that stuff is now in the hands of Dar al-Islam. They keep it in places like the House of Wisdom or the libraries of Timbuktu or Cairo or Delhi. So East Asia 1.1 and Dar al-Islam 1.2 are easily the top 2 seeds from Unit 1, the Global Tapestry. But for the next few days, we're going to run 2-a-days. Today we're going to double up on 2 cultures from Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, so let's get to it. Let's start with South and Southeast Asia. Makes sense because it's between what we did the last 2 days of East Asia and Dar al-Islam. And we've already mentioned some of these spots that are in South and Southeast Asia, like the Delhi Sultanate or Champa. For this section, the College Board mentions 7 different states. I, of course, put them all on a map. Don't memorize these. Focus on the Delhi Sultanate. They do say that one by name. And then they just list these other 7. Pick one of them and just go with that one. Now this list of 7, where you see most of these, are Hindu/Buddhist states, meaning they were Hindu, or are Buddhist, were Buddhist, and it's some blend of the two. Me, I lean Srivijaya. Why? Because I made a whole video about Srivijaya. I highly recommend you go watch it. But it's a Buddhist state in Southeast Asia that controls a major trade route between China and India. And of course I'll put links to this below, but I'm just saying I think it's a good one. But beyond these states, for this section, focus on religion. And for South and Southeast Asia, that's Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. In fact, they actually bring up some new advancements in religion that are first mentioned by that name, and then they just list. Let's start with South and Southeast Asia. Makes sense because it's between what we did the last 2 days of East Asia and Dar al-Islam. And we've already mentioned some of these spots that are in South and Southeast Asia, like the Delhi Sultanate or Champa. For this section, the College Board mentions 7 different states. I, of course, put them all on a map. Don't memorize these. Focus on the Delhi Sultanate. They do say that one by name, and then they just list these other 7. Pick one of them and just go with that one. Now this list of 7, where you see most of these, are Hindu/Buddhist states, meaning they were Hindu, or are Buddhist, were Buddhist, and it's some blend of the two. Me, I lean Srivijaya. Why? Because I made a whole video about Srivijaya. I highly recommend you go watch it. But it's a Buddhist state in Southeast Asia that controls a major trade route between China and India. And of course I'll put links to this below, but I'm just saying I think it's a good one. But beyond these states, for this section, focus on religion. And for South and Southeast Asia, that's Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. In fact, they actually bring up some new advancements in religion that are first mentioned by the College Board here. So let's talk about them. One, the Bhakti movement. This is a Hindu movement, very similar to the way the Sufis in Islam seek a personal relationship with Allah. The Bhakti movement seeks a personal relationship with a Hindu deity. Think of it as Islam's counter to the rise of Buddhism and the rise of Islam in the past few centuries. Sufism is the other one, and it's a word that if you read enough history, it pops up enough. I figure we should talk about it. We mentioned before that it's Islamic mysticism. And you would definitely notice them for their meetings and specifically their dance style. And you don't really find Islamic monks, but this is about as close as you're gonna get. If Islamic missionaries came to your town and put on a performance and were spinning around in circles, odds are those were the Sufis. And they set up schools and rest houses and a network across all of Dar al-Islam. Okay. South and Southeast Asia is a major trade region located along the Indian Ocean trade route that is dominated by Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Let's pivot to the Americas. So the Americas in this period aren't really sewn into the global tapestry. They remain largely isolated until the next period. And on the map, much like South and Southeast Asia, I put all the spots the College Board mentions. Do not sit here and memorize all these places. In fact, the description by the College Board on 1.4 is the vaguest one in the entire course. In the Americas, as in Afro-Eurasia, state systems demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity, and expanded in scope and reach. Got it. Things continued and expanded. Very helpful. So not a ton of specifics. In my class, we doubled down heavy on the Aztecs in Tenochtitlan and Cusco and the Incas. With the Aztecs, we looked at Chinampa farming and human sacrifice. And with the Inca, we looked at Pachacuti and the Incan roads and the Mita system. So your teacher may have gone over Cahokia and Mesa Verde, and that's fantastic. All the things on the map can be examples of state building in the Americas. We'll actually come back to the Americas in Unit 4 when the Spanish show up. All right, one more 2 days, coming up tomorrow. We'll finish up the unit. See you then. So over the past week, we've gone through most of the global tapestry. Today, we cover the final two sections, Africa and Europe. Let's start with the more important of the two, Africa. That's right, Africa. Your teacher may have gone way overboard on Europe here, but it's just not necessary. A lot of elderly Americans like myself were brought up in a world where all history was seen through the point of view of Europe. If that's your thing, take AP Euro. But this is AP World Modern. No region will make up more than 20% of the exam. Plus, we get plenty of Europe in units 3 through 9, so let's focus on Africa. 1.6 is going to give you a quick tour of the major states in Africa from 1200 to 1450. There are 3 major spots, and you know I made a map. First, Mali. This technically isn't brought up until 2.4 in the Trans-Saharan trade route, but 1.5 is state building in Africa, and Mali is one of the most important states in Africa we'll talk about all year. But you need to view Mali as the greatest benefactor of that Trans-Saharan trade. It brought sub-Saharan Africa into the greater trade network that the College Board calls the Global Tapestry. Mali controlled the valuable gold and salt trade, and was even famously led by the richest man of all time, Mansa Musa. You know Mansa Musa, the guy who's Hajj to Mecca, where he spent so much gold that Mali and its capital Timbuktu were officially woven into the global tapestry. They're not just connected by a trade route. Islam becomes the predominant religion in the Empire of Mali, giving it even more ties to Dar al-Islam to the north. Ibn Battuta even took his final trip across the Sahara Desert to visit cities like Timbuktu and Gao. Second, Ethiopia. If we head to the east side of Africa, we find a very different empire. Whereas Mali was Islamic, Ethiopia is Christian, and it was built along the east side of Africa, connecting it to that Indian Ocean trade network that we'll mention next week. Ethiopia will come back to us in Unit 6 and Unit 8 when we talk about the industrialized Europeans coming in and taking over all of Africa. Well, all but one spot, Ethiopia. It's even been said that Ethiopia may be the inspiration for Marvel's Wakanda. 3, Great Zimbabwe. This is the largest African structure south of the pyramids. When the Europeans found it abandoned in 1531, they were so impressed, they were like, whoa, this is awesome. Can't believe white people used to live this far south. Now, Great Zimbabwe and the regions around it were pre-literate, which means most of what we know about them comes via archaeology. Think of them as also playing into that Indian Ocean trade network as they traded eastward towards the Indian Ocean. Think of them as more of an extension of the Indian Ocean trade network as they served as a center of trade towards the east to the Swahili coast. I mean, look at these bricks, right? No mortar. You can't even build Legos right. These guys are using flat bricks. Okay, fine. Let's talk about Europe. Your teacher's probably like, Magna Carta, the Vikings, the Hanseatic League. Nah, not necessary. Let me save you some time. Focus on one thing: feudalism. Rome is gone, Europe is fragmented, and everything in Europe is very local. There are monarchies, but they're super decentralized. So think of feudalism as the system of relationships where one person grants land in return for military obligations. You're a lord. King grants you some land. If some other king invades, you have to then defend that land for your king. No war? Cool. You have all these people here that are going to be working for you. But when the war happens, they go from workers to soldiers and you must defend the king. When they're not fighting, they're working in and around the manor. Now, the manor is the large house where the lord lives. The system of work around the manor is known as manorialism. Think of manorialism as the actual work of feudalism as seen happening in real time on the lord's manor. One other thing the College Board also brings up: serfdom. When you get to Unit 4, obviously, coercive labor is a huge deal, but that doesn't mean it was invented in Unit 4, serfdom. So at that lowest level of manorialism and at the bottom of the feudal scale, you run into serfs. Serfs are coerced labor that are tied to the land and treated almost as property. So I say in class, you always need to think of them as like a feature of the property. Like if you're going to buy a house and it has a swimming pool, that's like a feature of the house. The same thing, like, oh, this manor comes with like 50 serfs. Do you own the serfs? Not technically, but you do own the land that they're tied to, so therefore they're going to work for you. So the whole feudal thing is reciprocal, where the lord grants a fief of land to someone in return for protection and labor. It sounds miserable. There is other European stuff that will help you out, but it's not brought up till later. I'm talking about like the Crusades, the Plague, Marco Polo. That's it. Done with Unit 1. We'll spend one more day with the MVP of the global tapestry tomorrow. As we're reviewing day by day and section by section, I start to notice certain people are popping up more than other people, or that their lives personify the unit more than others. Today, let's talk about the MVP of the global tapestry, Ibn Battuta. There's no way you've made it this far and not heard the name Ibn Battuta. But if so, have no fear. The Around the AP World in 80 Days Countdown has your back. If your teacher came up with some lame assignment like, create a historical figure that personifies an era, you would invent Ibn Battuta. Don't believe me? Watch this. 1.1 East Asia, dude traveled to China. 1.2 Dar al-Islam. He was from North Africa and spent over a decade as an Islamic judge. 1.3 South and Southeast Asia, that decade of being an Islamic judge, that was in Delhi. In the Delhi Sultanate. 1.4, state building in the Americas? Yeah. Okay, no one's perfect. 1.5, state building in Africa. He was the first person from north of the Sahara to go to sub-Saharan Africa and return and write about it. 1.6, state building in Europe. Okay, this is a stretch, but on his way to Delhi, he went north and visited the lands of the Golden Horde and met the Khan. That meeting took place in modern-day Russia, which is in Europe. See, dude is everywhere, and more importantly, he wrote it down. And his trip says as much for his own journey as it does for the size and scope of Dar al-Islam. And if you're like, oh, what about Marco Polo or Admiral Zheng He? That's cute. Ibn Battuta traveled 2.5 times farther than Zheng He, and 5 times farther than Marco Polo. So if you need to put a face on the global tapestry unit from 1200 to 1450, that face is countdown. South and Southeast Asia, that decade East Asia, dude traveled to China. One point two, Dar al-Islam. He was from North Africa and spent over a decade as an Islamic judge. 1.3, South and Southeast Asia, that decade of being an Islamic judge, that was in Delhi, in the Delhi Sultanate. 1.4, state building in the Americas? Yeah. Okay, no one's perfect. 1.5, state building in Africa. He was the first person from north of the Sahara to go to sub-Saharan Africa and return and write about it. 1.6, state building in Europe. Okay, this is a stretch, but on his way to Delhi, he went north and visited the lands of the Golden Horde and met the Khan. That meeting took place. Today we start Unit 2, the Networks of Exchange. This was all that trade talk your teacher wouldn't shut up about, so let's talk trade. And the granddaddy of all the trade routes is the Silk Road. Are the Silk Roads? Is the Silk Road? Whatever. The Silk Roads. The Silk Roads get all the run. If the trade routes were a boy band, the Silk Road would be Justin Timberlake or Harry Styles. They're on all the red carpets. Their Instagram feed is fire. But I'm gonna say something controversial here. This is my least favorite one. I know. I have a lot of controversial stances. 1. Frozen sucked. 2. College football is way better than pro football. 3. Return of the Jedi is the best Star Wars film. Four, X-Men is better than the Avengers. And 5, the Silk Road is the lamest trade route. I mean, it's fine. Yeah, it can. 5, Return of the Jedi, Frozen is the best Star Wars film. 4, X-Men is better than the Avengers. And 5, the
Bro, we don't have a comp sci quiz, bro. No, man.
Silk Road is the lamest trade route. I mean, it's fine. Yeah, it connects the world to China via a series of roads that allowed for ideas, technology,
Standard classes. Standard classes. Standard classes. Standard classes. Java. No, just off.
beliefs and diseases to permeate. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. But it's a road. And it's not even a cool road like the Incan roads or the Roman roads or the Royal Road or Rainbow Road. So here's my begrudging review of the Silk Road. I got about 3 things that you need to focus on. 1, trade cities. Despite being incredibly boring, the Silk Roads did lead to an increase in these large trade cities across Asia. They're so important the College Board gives you 2 illustrative examples. Now when you see an illustrative example, you don't have to know any of them. They are just examples that illustrate whatever it is the topic is. So they say you need to know trade cities along the Silk Road, and they're like, here's 2, your teacher should probably maybe use one of these to talk about. I'm gonna mention both of them. And you can use them interchangeably or come up with your own, but these 2 are pretty good. You got Kashgar in western China, and you have Samarkand in modern day Uzbekistan. So these are both hubs of trade that developed along the Silk Road trade routes. 2, new technologies. These are things like caravanserais. Now it literally means caravan palace, but don't think of it as a palace as much as it is a protected inn or a small fortress that will defend people. You come in, you pay a fee, you get to stay the night, water the camels, get some food. Meanwhile, you're protected from bandits or marauders or whoever may be trying to get your silk. Also, bills of exchange. Remember that flying cash from the Tang dynasty? These were pieces of paper that Tang merchants would use to trade back and forth amongst themselves that once they got back to the capital, they could exchange for metal coins. These weren't a true currency, but they were kind of like an IOU. Well, by 1200, full-blown bills of exchange are being used across China. It's easier to trade large amounts of wealth via paper money than it is stacks on stacks on stacks of coins. So paper money will flourish and grow from here and end up traveling along the Silk Road along with the Mongols all the way into Europe, where paper money became standard practice in the 1600s. 3. Stuff. This is the stuff that was literally traded along the trade routes. It's basically all the cool stuff that China had. Porcelain, gunpowder, steel, champa rice, the compass, paper, the bubonic plague, gunpowder, steel, champa rice, the compass, paper, the bubonic plague. And some stuff flowed into China as well. This is all the stuff coming from Dar al-Islam, things like algebra and the astrolabe. I know I said stuff, but not just stuff, also religion. There's 2 big ones in this period. The first is Buddhism, which will spread into China and then from there throughout East Asia with huge cultural impacts. The other is Islam, moving into South and Southeast Asia. If only someone had made a whole map of the Silk Road and all the important things you need to know. You can see here all the major trade cities, religions, technology, and things traded along the route. Think of the Silk Road as the circulatory system of this unit. It's the major land-based trade route. Okay, enough about a road. I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to talk about the Mongols. It'll be great. This is the worst. I'm supposed to be doing some short review of the Mongols, the most epic thing from the entire first semester of the course, and I gotta do it in a couple minutes. I wouldn't shut up about a road yesterday, and now you want me to be really brief about the Mongol Empire? Alright, fine, I'll try. Let's go. This cannot be the place you're learning about the Mongols for the first time. I will not allow it. Go to Heimler's review, or even better, download Dan Carlin's 8-hour Wrath of the Khans podcast. He's the best podcaster ever, and it's one of his best. All right, let's start with the map. Check out the empire. Second largest empire ever. It's the largest contiguous empire ever. It's the second largest in land size. The British Empire will actually be larger later on in the modern period. I put 2 of the travelers who benefited from the Mongol control of the trade routes on there, plus the transfers to the west that the Mongol Empire spread. Okay, let's skip ahead past all the cool conquering stuff. Because the College Board doesn't care about fun. So all those states that have been conquered have now been replaced with khanates. This period has a bunch of different styles of government. They all end the same way and sound slightly similar, but are slightly different. First are these khanates. These are regions ruled by Mongol descendants after the death of Genghis Khan. Second, caliphates. These are Islamic states ruled by the successor to Muhammad, the caliph. Third, sultanates. Okay, so the caliph is the leader of the faith, but a sultan is an Islamic ruler who rules an area but does not claim to be the leader of that faith. Think of the caliph more like the pope and a sultan more like the king. Fourth, shogunates. These pop up in Japan and will pop up in Japan for a good chunk of the rest of the course. This is when a Japanese general unites a large section of Japan and rules it. Now the emperor is still in charge, but the sultan has real power. So you should be able to delineate or tell the difference between all of these different styles of government. Anyway, the Mongol Empire ends up breaking up into these khanates. So it sucks being conquered by the Mongols, but after the conquering and the carnage, there are some benefits. You are now welcomed into the greater economy of the Mongols and the greater trade networks that the Mongols oversaw. Finally, the most important thing they want you to know about the Mongols is that after it's all said and done, the Mongol Empire opened up a safer, more connected trade network that allowed all that silk stuff from yesterday to grow exponentially. The examples the College Board gives of these transfers across the Mongol Empire are Greco-Islamic medicine to Europe, number system, carry on, no arrows, no tactics, none of that. Terrible. Alright, enough Mongols. Tomorrow we're back. This is all review, right? So, most likely by this point in the year, you will have covered the maritime empires of Unit 4. Well, your Prince Henrys and Columbuses and Da Gamas and all those guys, their main goal was to get into the Indian Ocean trade network. Everything that happened in Unit 4 with the British and Portuguese and Dutch and Spanish, they wanted to get here. This was the spot. Today, we talk about the Indian Ocean Network of Exchange. Let's start with the map. I know, it's a lot, but that's part of the reason the College Board starts you off with the global tapestry in Unit 1. You should know where these places are. Now, they turn to these trade routes in Unit 2. You should recognize 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.5 are all directly involved in this trade route. So let's look on the west side of this map, Africa. And in this case, the Swahili states. If you mix the Bantu languages of sub-Saharan Africa with the Arabic from Dar al-Islam, you get Swahili. This is Africa's access point to the Indian Ocean trade. Hey, great Zimbabwe. See, it all connects. Okay, from there we move north and you run into Dar al-Islam. Hey, you can see the Kaaba. Keep moving east and you run into South and Southeast Asia. Keep going north from there and you are now in East Asia. The Indian Ocean Trade Network connects almost every single region from the global tapestry. And with all these cultures meeting and trading and interacting, there's bound to be some significant cultural transfers. I mean, the big three interregional travelers all went here. Sorry, Marjorie Kemp. A Moroccan named Ibn Battuta, a merchant from Venice named Marco Polo, and that Admiral Zheng He from the Ming Dynasty in China. So now we've got the lay of the land, but let's see what the College Board actually wants you to know. In this period, new technologies and improving technologies like dhow ships, lateen sails, the compass, the astrolabe, bigger and bigger ship designs, all increased the size and the scope of trading throughout the Indian Ocean. In the same way the Silk Road had those powerful trading cities, powerful trading states will develop all along the Indian Ocean. The states they mention as growing along with the Indian Ocean trade in this period are the Swahili coast, Gujarat in India, and the Sultanate of Malacca. So looking back at the map, don't overstress all of these states in the Indian Ocean trade network. Just know a couple in case you have to throw down some knowledge. Here's my suggestion, spread out. Know something from each region of the Indian Ocean trade. My suggestion, Swahili coast, Delhi Sultanate, and Srivijaya. Full disclosure, I'm biased. I did a whole video on Srivijaya and you should totally watch it. One thing all of these people had to recognize was the monsoon winds. I know it sounds scary, but they are actually helpful. They are predictable and run a seasonal pattern, so you know in one season you're going this way, the next season it's taking you back that way. One last thing, diaspora. This is a term that may be new to you, but it's brought up for the first time here in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. That means you and your people are living away from your original place of origin. The best way I've ever heard it described, people who identify with the homeland, but are not living in that homeland. And with more trade comes more diaspora. Back to the map. See these geographic markers, they show you the examples of people living in diaspora. The Arabs and Persians are in green, the Malay people from Malacca are in purple, and of course, we've talked Silk Road, we've talked Indian Ocean trade, we've even talked about the Mongols during the networks of exchange. We got one left, the Trans-Saharan trade route. Today's trade route has the most value for you. Why? Well, 1.5 was all about Africa and state building there. But without the Trans-Saharan trade route, Africa would have remained on the outside of the global tapestry like the Americas. But because of the Trans-Saharan trade route, Africa fully joins the networks of exchange. And that value for you is by knowing a couple people, a couple places, and a couple things traded. And you'll know everything you need to know about the Trans-Saharan trade route. Let's go to the map. You gotta start looking at the Sahara like an ocean. It's tough to cross, and it serves as a barrier to everything. You see there in the northeast, you may remember the Mamluks from Dar al-Islam, and Mali and Ethiopia from 1.5 state building in Africa. The trade routes across the Sahara broke into these patterns. Now notice the trade routes also lead to large trade cities, just like the other trade routes. Plus, you have some new tech to help out the trade, just like the other trade routes. Camel saddles allow for more volume of trade. Camel caravans provide safety and became the way stuff was traded across the Sahara Desert. Remember caravanserais? They have those too. And why cross the desert? Easy. Gold and salt, two of the most valuable trading commodities on the planet at the time. Just like the other trade routes, it wasn't just salt and gold and camels. There were other things. Most importantly, Islam. So the big sub-Saharan state that they want you to know in this period is Mali. It's mentioned a couple times. And so the big thing religiously that happens for them is they are an Islamic state. You may recall Mansa Musa and his pilgrimage to Mecca and all the gold, but that's it. That's the Trans-Saharan trade route. Those are kind of the big ideas. I told you, it's a good investment in your time. If you know the people, the places, and what was traded and how it connected sub-Saharan Africa to the greater Dar al-Islam and the rest of the global. It's been a wild ride across the entire planet as we've gone through the first 2 units of AP World History Modern, but today we wrap up the last 2 sections of the post-classical period, 1200 to 1450. So we've set the stage for the course. We've seen the major regions and how they interact with one another. Only one thing left. Today, we look at the consequences, both environmental and cultural, of the networks of exchange. So the College Board wraps up the networks of exchange with 2 sections on consequences. In reality, your teacher probably already went over this stuff as they went through Units 1 and Unit 2, so there's really no need for this extra section at the end. How do I know that your teacher probably already went over it? Because I went over it with you a couple days ago. As we keep going through these things are bound to pop up when you're talking about either the global tapestry or the networks of exchange. But since the College Board does it as a separate thing, we'll do it as a separate thing, so let's go. One section focuses on the cultural consequences. The other section focuses on the environmental consequences. And to be honest, we're going to fly through this because it's pretty redundant. First, cultural consequences. Increased cross-cultural interactions resulted in the diffusion of literary, artistic, and cultural traditions, as well as scientific and technical innovations. And as you can see here, this is where all the travelers we've discussed are actually mentioned by name. Now, this is also where the spread of religion along the trade routes is also brought up. Finally, you can see the technology that moved across the networks. Now, I didn't include these on the map I use on my website, but the College Board does specifically talk about the growth of trade cities. But then, of course, they don't mention any of them by name. So I made my own list, a Freemanpedia list of cities to know in the post-classical period. First, Timbuktu. The Malian cap point election from here was in India, but to go through all of the sections. That's see your diffusion of crops and pathogens with very short. All they say is all 8 should be good. In fact, it's probably impossible to go through all of the sections of Unit 1 and all the sections of Unit 2 without mentioning at least 5 or 6 of these. Finally, the environmental consequences, and this section is short. Very short. All they say is this. There was a continued diffusion of crops and pathogens with epidemic diseases, including bubonic plague, along trade routes. See, not a lot. And on the map, I put all the illustrative examples that they give you. Now, I took these a step further and added the routes these environmental effects traveled because I'm extra. So the specifics they mention are going to be sugar, bananas, including bubonic plague, along trade routes. See, not a lot. And on the map, I put all the illustrative examples that they give you. Now, I took these a step further and added the routes these environmental effects traveled because I'm extra. So the specifics they mention are going to be sugar, bananas, citrus fruits, and champa up when you're talking about increased cross-cultural interactions resulted in the diffusion of literary, artistic, and cultural traditions, as well as scientific and technical innovations. And as you can see here, this is where all the travelers we've discussed are actually. Full disclosure, there are no MVPs, I just made this up. But there are people in these units who personify the units more than others. And to be honest, Ibn Battuta is the MVP of Unit 1 and Unit 2. But I decided that no one can win the MVP award twice, so the MVP of the Networks of Exchange is Mansa Musa. The Around the AP World in 80 Days Countdown was not developed by the staff here at Freemanpedia to waste your time. I know for a fact you went over Mansa Musa, so I'm not going to spend 10 minutes on the guy. Instead, let's pick through his life story and see how it connects to the Networks of Exchange themselves. Mansa Musa actually shows up twice in the first 2 units. First, in 1.5, state building in Africa. And if you follow the 8-bit coins, you can trace his famous pilgrimage to Mecca. And he shows up again in 2.4, the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. Now, Mansa Musa embodies the networks of exchange in 3 major ways. 1, religion. This was a huge consequence of the Trans-Saharan trade route. With the intensification of trade along this trade route in the post-classical period, Islam played a larger and larger role. I mean, check out the Trans-Saharan trade route. It goes to one place, Dar al-Islam. In fact, sub-Saharan Africa will join Dar al-Islam after the great empires there convert, starting with Ghana and continuing on to both Mali and the Songhai. And no one personifies the impact of Islam on sub-Saharan Africa more than our MVP, Mansa Musa. As Mansa, or leader, he was a devout Muslim, and his pilgrimage is easily one of the most famous of all time. 2, trade. All of the trade being done by camel caravans across the largest desert on the planet was not to just see the desert. Once you've seen one desert, you've seen them all. Am I right? But gold and salt were valuable enough for people to continually make the arduous trek across the Sahara Desert in search of trade. And no one personifies the wealth and power that is associated with that trade more than our MVP, Mansa Musa. In 2019, Forbes magazine stated that Mansa Musa's control of the Trans-Saharan trade route made him worth around $130 billion, which makes him the Armote, the richest man of all time. Third, ideas. If you add the impact of Islam and the wealth of trade together, you get the 1324 pilgrimage of Mansa Musa to Mecca. You remember this in class because your teacher was probably like, oh, he spent so much money in gold in Egypt that he ruined their economy. But did your teacher mention that every Friday along the route he stopped and built a mosque and donated it to the people who lived there? Or that on the way back he made a bunch of low-interest loans to the people of Cairo so that he could help restabilize the economy there? Nah, your teacher just treated Mansa Musa like some venture capitalist out to ruin others with his intense wealth. My man was just showing his wealth and power by trading like anyone else would, and yet everyone says he ruined economies. Take it easy on old Mansa Musa. Now the ideas part is when he returns to Timbuktu. He brings back scholars and architects, and they transform the city from just a trade city to also a cultural and intellectual center of Dar al-Islam. His wealth, the Islamic ties, and the knowledge that those ties brought literally put Mali on the map. Most famously in the 1375 Catalan Atlas, where the powerful Mansa can be seen holding the gold that made him the Armote. Before we move on to the early modern period, I figured now would be a good time to mention the People to Know section of Freemanpedia.com. I went and I compiled all the people that are either explicit. Congratulations, everyone. You survived the first 2 units of AP World History Modern. Those first 2 units comprise the post-classical period that runs from 1200 to 1450. But alas, we must move on as we pivot to the early modern period, 1450 to 1750. This is the Age of Empires. And we're going to go 2 days for the next 3 days to cover the big ones, but there are others that are land-based empires but aren't given the coverage of the Big Six. So don't forget about the Aztecs, the Incas, Tokugawa Japan, and the Songhai Empire in sub-Saharan Africa. These are all land-based empires in this period, but are not listed in the main curriculum as the main ones to know, like Russia, Ming and Qing China, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavids, and the Mughals. First up, Russia. Full disclosure here, I teach a Russian history course and am a bit obsessed. But you shouldn't be. Don't get bogged down on any one of these empires, and specifically not the Russian Empire. And if you are going to get bogged down in one of these empires, do one of the heavy hitters like the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire. The College Board loves them some Ottomans. Here's a quick review of my boys, the Russian Empire. First, let's talk terminology. Russia is European, but is not Western. That means when the College Board's talking about Europe, of course you can include all of these fun Russian things. But when they talk about the West or the Western world, you cannot include any of these fun Russian things. And 1450 to 1750 is Russia's coming out party. Things start with Ivan the Great. He's the reason you've heard of Russia. 1, he's one of the 4 greats in Russian history. 2, he defeated the Mongols and kicked them out for good. 3, he married the heiress to the Byzantine Empire. And from here on out, Russia will consider itself the Third Roman Empire. You should not consider it the Third Roman Empire. And this is part of that non-Western bit. They are the inheritors of the Eastern Byzantine Roman Empire. That means writing and religion and culture. 4. Ivan took the title Caesar, or as they say in Russia, Tsar. Also, spell it like this. It's closer to how it's actually pronounced in Russian. Sorry, it's just one of my pet peeves. Sorry. So Ivan the Great sets them on the path to success. And after a brief hiccup under Ivan the Terrible, the Russians reassemble under the Romanov family. And just 3 generations into the Romanovs, you run into the big show himself, Peter the Great. Know Peter the Great for his grand embassy to the west, to the VOC Dutch shipyards, or even to London where he met with Isaac Newton. He comes back to Russia, modernizes Russia in a process known as Westernization, and brought Russia into the early modern world. Okay, enough Russia. Let's talk China. Now, China's in a weird spot in the early modern period because 1450 to 1750 is the last half of the Ming Dynasty and the first half of the Qing or Manchu Dynasty. You remember the Ming or Bright Dynasty, right? They kicked out the Mongols, sent Admiral Zheng He all around with his treasure fleet, and returning China to a more secluded state. Well, they ended up losing the mandate of heaven for a myriad of reasons, including they had a severe silver problem, not to mention the largest earthquake in the history of the planet that killed almost 1 million people. And all their crops were dying because of the Little Ice Age, so there's a lot of problems there in Ming China. Well, this leaves the door open for the Manchus to come down from the north and start the final Chinese dynasty, the Qing dynasty, or sometimes the College Board calls it the Manchu dynasty. And I say final because this one runs into the 20th century. There is a ton to know about the Qing dynasty, just not in this period. Most of the AP World Modern stuff that happens to the Manchus or the Qing dynasty in China is really cool. So is the haircut. You may have noticed that I shave my 2 more land-based empires today, no problem. Let's jump into the biggest rivalry of the early modern period, the Ottomans and the Safavids. If the College Board had a boyfriend, it would be the Ottoman Empire. They won't shut up about him. They're mentioned in the College Board CED 32 times. That's more than the United States. We're only mentioned 26 times. And our other 2 a day here, the Safavids, are mentioned a grand total of 5 times. That's the same amount as Germany, and Germany's only been around for like a minute. So when it comes down to all the land-based empires, double down on the Ottoman Empire. So let's start with the Ottomans. This period, 1450 to 1750, is kind of built for the Ottomans. The same way Russia is put on the map in this era, The Ottomans are put on the map in this era. The Ottomans, although they were around before 1450, really introduced themselves to planet Earth by taking down what I like to call downtown Earth, Constantinople, in 1453. We could go on forever about the Ottomans, but this is all review, so let's just run through the big things to know about the Ottoman Empire in the early modern period, 1450 to 1750. 1. The fall of Constantinople. There's a new kid on the block, and that kid's name is the Ottoman Empire. By Rome, there's a new kid on the block, and they will remain on that block until the end of World War I in 1919. 2. The Devshirme. Now, I'll save you the details that your teacher probably grossly got into in class. This is at best a recruitment system and at worst a blood tax, where the Ottomans would go into Southeast Europe, kidnap Christian children, convert them to Islam, and raise them in the Ottoman traditions. Once in Istanbul, they would be tracked for different positions, government jobs, religious jobs, or, most infamously, the janissaries of the military. 3. The rivalry with the Safavids. Keep in mind, since the Ottomans have control of what I like to call downtown Earth as the meeting point of where Europe, Asia, and Africa come together, there's a lot of people that are going to claim to be rivals to the Ottoman Empire, but let's focus on the Safavids today. Why? This is not all about territory. This is the major religious fight between the Sunni Ottomans and the Shia Safavids. 4. Millets. These are the nations that existed within the Ottoman Empire. So think of the Ottoman Empire as a vast multicultural society. Now, they are Sunni Muslim and they are in charge and they rule over everyone else. But to rule over a multicultural society, you have to be pretty tolerant, and for the time, the Ottomans were just that. Remember when Spain kicked out all the Muslims and Jews in 1492? Guess who accepted them with open arms? The Ottoman Empire. 5. Don't make me say it. Tax farming. I don't care what you think of my channel. That's a quality episode. This is how the Ottomans farmed out their right to tax to the highest bidder to ensure a steady flow of income without having to vastly expand their bureaucracy. Okay, that's a quick review of the Ottomans. They are mentioned 32 times, so when you're done with Unit 3 and if you're looking back through all these empires, maybe double down on the Ottomans. And they are not going to go away. In the next period, their power is going to kind of start to wane a little bit, but they're not like the Safavids that like completely exist within this period, so stick with the Ottomans. Next up, the Safavids. Now, the College Board barely mentions them, so I'm going to barely mention them. In fact, let me save you some time here. There is one thing to know about the Safavid Empire. They follow Shia Islam, and they're wedged between two monster empires, the Ottomans on one side and the Mughals on the other. And so, as we've seen and will see, the Ottomans and Mughals are Sunni Muslims ruling over an incredibly diverse empire. The Safavids, not so much. The Safavids are Shia, and they require you to be Shia. In fact, the Safavids put Shiism on the map. They're the first major empire to be ruled by Shia Muslims. Before the Safavids, the Shia were always a minority in this caliphate or that sultanate. Literally, the only thing to know about them for this exam is they are Shia Muslim, and they're constantly clashing with both the Mughals and the Ottomans. And when I say clashing, I don't mean quarreled or had a problem with. They fought 9 wars with the Ottomans in this period. 9. Two big ones today. Let's talk about the richest land-based empire, the Mughals, and the final shogunate in Japan, the Tokugawa. The Mughals. Think of the Mughals as the inheritors of the Delhi Sultanate. If by inherit, you mean that they invaded, killed the people in charge of the Delhi Sultanate, and just took it for themselves. The same way the Ottomans kicked down the door of what was left of the Byzantine Empire, the Mughals are kicking down the door of what's left of the Delhi Sultanates. Something I've kind of glanced past here during this whole thing is the importance of gunpowder. All of these empires are gunpowder empires. In other words, they're in power because they use gunpowder to take power. And this isn't just a term for the Islamic empires. Sometimes textbooks or teachers will just call the Islamic empires the gunpowder empires. But do you think the Manchu won an election? You think Ivan tapped the Mongols on the shoulder and was like, hey, it's time to go, guys? You think the Safavids just enforced Shi'ism through an honor code? You think the Spanish were just kind enough to ask the Incas, hey gang, could you get down there and do a little silver mining for me? Nah, they all use gunpowder. You could rename the early modern period the gunpowder period. Actually, one of them did not. The Songhai Empire in sub-Saharan Africa. And they lost their empire to the Moroccans. Why? Guess what the Moroccans had more of? Gunpowder. Speaking of gunpowder, how were the Mughals able to take over the much larger Delhi Sultanate? Gunpowder. So the Mughals are going to go on to rule over most of the Indian subcontinent. Think of them like the Ottomans ruling over Christians and Muslims and Jews. But the Sunni Mughals are actually ruling over a massive population of Hindus. And in situations like this, if you want to survive as the ruling group, you need to get real tolerant real quick. In fact, their greatest ruler was their most tolerant ruler. He's the greatest ruler of all time, Akbar the Great. Great. No, Akbar literally means great. So he's the greatest by definition. His name means great, the great. And he personifies religious tolerance for this period. And when your teacher's talking about tolerance in this period, whether it was the Ottomans or the Mughals, this isn't First Amendment freedom of religion kind of tolerance. Where they go Sakoku or locked country and they kick everyone out except China, Korea, and the Dutch. Or when they open back up in the 1850s after the arrival of the Americans. Now, we mentioned shogunates earlier as a style of government, and the Tokugawa shogunate is no different. You got a military shogun or general ruling over Japan with an emperor ruling as a figurehead only. More a religious symbol, really. And as the Europeans start to arrive in Japan and then start converting the Japanese people to Christianity, the shogun says, nah, this is too disruptive. Everyone out! And implements a system known as Sakoku, which means locked country. But they're still trading with Koreans, they're still trading with Chinese. But as for the Europeans, they are locked down. Having said that, they do allow trade with one group, and it's arguably the least invasive European group, the Dutch. Now, the weird thing about Unit 3 is how they divide it up into 3 sections. 3.1, Empires Expand. This is about how the empires expanded. And the last section, 3.3, Belief Systems. Much like the consequences of the networks of exchange that they throw at the end of Unit 2, it's hard to talk about any of these empires without bringing up their belief systems. But I guess we'll run through them real quick. If you've been with us the past few days, this is going to seem redundant. But the College Board stresses belief systems, so let's touch on each one now. Russia. They are Eastern Orthodox and then later Russian Orthodox, which essentially means they follow the more Greek side of the Byzantine side of the schism back in the year 1000, whereas Western Europe will be following more along the Roman Catholic side. China. For China, whether it's the Ming or the Qing, they are Neo-Confucianists ruling over a group of people in China that have a massive, diverse set of beliefs that are all baked in the cake, if you remember our example from a couple days ago. The Ottoman Empire is Sunni, and arguably they are the Sunni. Remember the old caliphate idea? They take that up. Where the Sultan will now also be the Caliph. Safavids. As we said a couple days ago, the Safavids are Shia, and that's the thing to know about them. And this isn't a brief thing to know for this section. That part of the world, which is modern-day Iran, is still incredibly Shia to this day. The Mughal Empire were Sunni, ruling over a massive Hindu population. In Tokugawa Japan, they were more like China in that the people had a mix of beliefs. These beliefs included things like Shintoism. Shintoism is an indigenous, polytheistic nature religion. Plus, they picked up Buddhism from China via those networks of exchange back in Unit 2. Now that's review. There are 2 new religions in this period you need to pick up on. The Protestants in Europe and the Sikhs in India. Protestants are are Christians who broke away from the Catholic Church in Western and Central Europe at the beginning of this period. Reasons like corruption or how you interpret the Bible, Islamic world continue to dominate over the you are probably some branch of Protestantism. Now, Sikhs are brand new, and they're easy to remember here because it's hard to pick an MVP for Unit 3. It's like picking the best player on the dream team. They're all great players with great resumes, but this is my show, so I get to pick. Today, let's talk about the MVP of the land-based empires, Akbar the Great. There's a lot of greats in this unit, but only one great, the Great. That's right, I'm talking about Akbar. He does some of the standard stuff you would expect from a great ruler. He ruled for decades, consolidated his empire's rule. He's a patron of the arts. There's a booming economy. He tripled the size of the empire. He tripled the wealth of the empire. But honestly, that could be Peter the Great or Suleiman the Magnificent. The thing that separates Akbar is his religious tolerance. Akbar wanted to lead a liberal, secular state. Now, the first two Mughal rulers were viewed by the Hindus as cruel Muslim kings. And they really didn't control the Mughal empire for that long. The first Mughal emperor Babur ruled for 4 years before dying. The second Mughal empire lost the empire, had to flee, and came back to rule for about a year before he died. So Akbar's the first real Mughal ruler who's gonna rule for a long time. And Akbar isn't from Central Asia. Akbar was born right on the border of modern-day India and Pakistan. He comes to power at the age of 12 and will rule for 49 years. One of his goals was to bring religious unity, and the way he wanted to do it was by developing an all-encompassing religion he referred to as Din-i-Ilahi, or oneness with God. And he took from all different belief systems. He took from Christianity, he took from Hinduism, he took from Zoroastrianism, he took from Islam. And he did Akbar things. He ended the tax on non-Muslims. He participated in Hindu festivals. He married a Hindu wife. He did everything possible to endear himself to a massive Hindu majority he ruled over for half a century. He's a patron of the arts. There's a booming economy. He tripled the size of the empire. He tripled the wealth of the empire. But honestly, that could be Peter the Great or Suleiman the Magnificent. The thing that was by developing an all-encompassing, and he did Akbar things. He ended the tax on non-Muslims. He participated in Hindu festivals. He married a Hindu wife. He did everything possible to endear himself to a massive Hindu majority he ruled over for half a century. In 2011, Time magazine came up with a list of the 25 biggest political icons of all time. Guess who's on the list? That's right, Akbar the Great, alongside people like Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Simon Bolivar, Abraham Lincoln. So that's my one seed, Akbar the Great. You could pick any number of people in this period, but Akbar's religious tolerance really pushes them over the edge to win him the award. All right, we're a third of the way through the units. You good? No? Okay, don't worry. Stick with me, I got you. All right, enough about these land-based empires. Let's talk about the maritime empires. See you tomorrow. Welcome to Unit 4. This unit mirrors Unit 3 pretty heavily. So instead of those land-based empires we focused on over the past week, Unit 4 is all about maritime empires. Maritime just means across the ocean. And the College Board breaks it down to 5 empires that we'll be covering this week. But you can't have a maritime empire if you don't actually go out there and start navigating. Today, let's talk technical innovations. Remember the first 2 units when your teacher was like, blah, 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 trade route, blah, 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 trade route, blah, blah, trade route, blah, trade route. Most of those units were devoted to the impact of the people, ideas, religion, products, diseases, and stuff spreading around. But very little time was given to the tech that allowed that stuff to happen. I mean, compasses and camel saddles, I guess? But for ocean going, for these maritime empires, we need to be specific. But let's not leave the 1200 to 1450 post-classical era just yet. Remember how Dar al-Islam was basically the brain of the planet back then? Well, the Europeans studied at the foot of Dar al-Islam. And 4.1 is all about the tech that the Europeans used to leave their weird peninsula and start building some empires. The College Board breaks it into thirds. First, new tools. This is stuff like the compass to tell your direction or the astrolabe to tell your location on Earth. If you're heading out of sight of the shoreline, you better have yourselves a compass and an astrolabe. Second, wind patterns. Wind patterns are everything. It may seem like a small part, but if you're stuck sailing into the wind all day, you're gonna have a bad time. Next time you're at the airport and they have those people movers that you can just get on the one going the wrong way and just start running. It's not very fun. Or just sit on the people mover going in the correct direction. Now that's a nice ride. Third, ship designs. This is where the Europeans take what was developed by the Greeks or Dar al-Islam and all the other navigators from the networks of exchange. The College Board gives you 3 illustrative examples. 1, caravels. These were small, highly maneuverable ships. The key feature here are these lateen sails. They allow you to sail into the wind, but these were relatively small. Need to go explore an area and get some reconnaissance? Take a caravel. The Nina and the Pinta were caravels. 2, carracks. These bad boys are much larger than caravels. Once you've gone out and explored in the caravel and you want to do some trading, the carrack is the boat for you. Carracks were cargo ships. No, literally, the word carrack is derived from the Arabic word karakir, which means merchant ship. The Santa Maria was a carrack. 3, flouts. That's right, flouts. When you think back about European for the cost 70, half of all was a flout. Okay, we've got the tech behind the voyages. What about the actual causes and events of these voyages? I'll see you tomorrow. Products, diseases, and stuff spreading around. But very little time was given to Islam was basically the brain of the planet back then. Well, the Europeans studied at the foot of Dar al-Islam. And 4.1 is all about the tech that the Europeans used to leave their weird peninsula and start building some empires. The College Board breaks it into thirds. First, new tools. Okay, we know how they got to where they're going, but who is going there and why? Today we talk about the causes and events of the transoceanic interconnections. All the land, but the maritime empires obviously. Now this map is super busy, but the maritime empires are super busy. This map actually has all the land-based empires of Unit 3 and the maritime empires of Unit 4. So let's follow some of these lines and set the board for Unit 4. First, the granddaddy of them all, the Portuguese. The navigators in the bottom right are listed in chronological order. So besides Admiral Zheng He in yellow, the next 2 navigators are Portuguese. Follow the green line of Prince Henry down the coast and continue on with Diaz and da Gama all the way around Africa into the Indian Ocean trade network. This was the goal. This was the point. Europe was dying to get into the Indian Ocean networks of exchange, and Portugal was up first. Before we move on, how about a quick vocab word for you? Trading post empire. It's so important, I made another map. They want you to know that these empires along Africa and Asia in this period are not huge swaths of land dominated by the Europeans. Rather, they set up trading posts like these along the coast as a trading spot with the empires and peoples they met along the way. So Portugal's up first, and they made it into Brazil and around Africa into the Indian Ocean network of exchange. Next up, Spain. This is easy. Along the way. So on the coast, dominated by the Europeans, empires, and Portugal was up first. Before we move on, how about a quick vocab word for you? Trading post empire. It's so important, I made another map. They want you to know that these empires along Africa and Asia in this period are not huge swaths of land dominated by the Europeans. Rather, they set up trading posts like these along the coast as a trading spot with the empires and peoples they met along the way. So Portugal's up first, and they made it into Brazil and around Africa into the Indian Ocean network of exchange. Next up, Spain. This is easy. Columbus to the New World, and then after the Treaty of Tordesillas, everything west of Brazil is Spanish territory. Now, they also wanted in on some of that sweet, sweet East Asian trade action. So follow Magellan's line here, and you'll land in the Philippines. They will control this until the end of the next period in 1896. Next up, the British. They have some early ventures into the New World with John Cabot, so set up your British pieces along the east coast of the present-day United States. But for the most value, the British will go on to dominate India. Not at first. They're setting up a trading post empire too, but this will eventually be the jewel in their crown. Plus, we kicked them out in 1776, so yeah. Next pieces to put on the board, the Dutch. The Dutch are one of the most important empires to focus in on this period. Why? Money. The Dutch Trading Company, or the VOC, is the most profitable business of all time. The Dutch are a bit late to the game, but once they get chartered and out into the Indian Ocean, they dominate. They're going to get the real jewel of all this trade, Indonesia and the Spice Islands. They will even get access to Japan when everyone else is kicked out by the Tokugawa shogunate. Last empire, France. This one is by far the smallest. They'll have Canada briefly and a few trading posts along the Indian Ocean, but they are by far the smallest and least important of the big five. Think of France as being way more important inside of Europe than they are outside of Europe in this period. Okay, the table is set. You now know where all the empires have set up
Okay, final class. When a variable function or class is declared final, its value persists throughout the program. Declaring a method with the final keyword indicates that the method cannot be overridden by a subclass. This is a class that is marked final cannot be a subclass. Declaring a method with the final keyword indicates that the method cannot be overridden by a subclass. This class, so if you had like car and then say final tire size or final tire, then that means the tire can't change for if you do like make a subclass of car for bike or something, or vehicle and then subclass car, and then you can't change. So that is this is very useful when creating immutable classes such as string classes, class commutated, final voice system dot print method for base class extends void display system dot print display class gg just d.display, which will be method for base class. Static class. A static is a Java word that explains how objects are kept in memory. Static object belongs to the class rather than the instances of that class. Primary function of the class is to provide blueprints for inherited classes. An object cannot be created for a static class. Static classes in S minus the class display. Abstract class. Class that has 0 or more abstract. Concrete class, Pojo class. Okay, I think I'll be fine. Alright. Just read static. A static object belongs to that class rather than the instance of that class. The primary function of the class is to provide as only static members. An object cannot be created for a static class. A static class was new. My class is static class display. Concrete class, normal class with an implementation. Actually, I should probably say class. Static class is basically the same as a non-static class, but there is one difference. Static class can be instantiated. In other words, you can't use the new operator to create a variable of the class type. Okay, it just can't be instantiated.